A well-to-do English nobleman gazes out of his window of his stately home. He sips his sugar-sweetened tea whilst puffing on his tobacco pipe and ponders his last few years. There is a completely new aroma from the kitchens down below which fill the manor, and his lordship's family query at the exotic smells. The man's wife enters the room with a peacock feather pluming from her hat, the newest fashions from the Far East. A few years ago, life was very different, because the small Isle of England was only a small player on the world stage, lagging far behind France, Netherlands, Portugal, and the superpower of the day, Spain. But now, England has the largest empire the world has ever seen. Britain is born. Hello and welcome to the series. I'm of course the Knight of History, and thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. This is the first of 5 episodes on a series on the British Empire. We're going to start out with America. But before we start, I want you to know that I'm only going to lightly touch the British Empire in this series. I mean, I could do 50 episodes just on America alone, for instance. But I hope that this series will give you a more well-rounded understanding of the British Empire. Please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Now, let's go ahead and get into this. From the 1600s to the 1900s, Britain built the largest empire the world has ever known. At its peak, it governed 1/4 of the world's landmass and 1/5 of the world's entire population. But they were definitely not the first ones to try their hands at empire building in this age. In fact, they actually started quite late. The journeys made by European explorers like Christopher Columbus at the end of the 15th century opened the doors to the New World, which gave birth to a new age of European empire building. The first of the blocks were Spain, establishing colonies in America with the modern-day countries of Mexico and Peru. The next, of course, were the Portuguese, developing the most extensive trading routes spreading from Brazil to Indonesia. Then, of course, there were the Netherlands, who pioneered an advanced banking system for investing overseas trade with the VOC. In comparison to their European neighbours, England lagged well behind. Towards the end of the 16th century, England decided to set up a colony in America in 1587. 116 people set out to establish a colony called Roanoke, with their governor being John White. When they arrived, the governor turned back to go to England after a month in order to collect more supplies. But whilst he was in England, he actually struggled to find his way back to the colony. He couldn't get a ship. Only 3 years later, though, he did manage to get a ship in 1590, and he did manage to find his way back to where the colony was. However, when he arrived there, the entire colony had disappeared without a trace. In fact, to this day, it remains a mystery and is still known as the Lost Colony. No one knows what happened. By the beginning of the 17th century, England began to re-establish more colonies in America. England's first successful colony was that of the Virginia colony in North America, named after England's Virgin Queen, Elizabeth I, and it was much larger than the state that is known as Virginia today. It was settled by a private company known as the Virginia Company. Many of these early colonies were actually settled by private companies. But by 1606, King James I had granted them a royal charter to explore and cultivate the North American territories, which allowed English settlers to build large farms called plantations, but they struggled to find the right crop for the soil and the climate. However, everything changed when they introduced the crop of the tobacco plant in 1617. Soon, enormous tobacco plantations spread across the colony, and by the 1700s, almost 6 million kilograms of Virginia tobacco was being exported back to Britain every single year. Further up north, though, a very different colony began to develop. On the 9th of November 1620, a boat called the Mayflower, carrying 102 passengers, landed in Cape Cod, known today as Massachusetts. Many of the passengers were Puritans who wanted to escape England and create a community of perfect godliness in the New World. They were known as the Pilgrim Fathers. They named the much wetter and colder section of North America New England. The Pilgrim Fathers actually established a lucrative trade through buying animal furs from Native American tribes and fishing the abundant fishing stocks in the American eastern coastline. By 1640, 20,000 more settlers had arrived in New England. Other colonies were settled in North America, such as that of Maryland, named after Charles I's wife, and New York, named after Charles II's brother, the Duke of York. York, of course, being the ancient town in England. By 1732, Britain had 13 colonies stretching along America's east coastline, from New Hampshire in the north to Georgia in the south. These colonies were absolutely catastrophic for the Native Americans. The indigenous population were being exposed to European diseases for the first time, like smallpox, influenza, and diphtheria. They had no resistance to these diseases. The estimated 2 million Native Americans that lived in their own nations in the 1500s plummeted to around 325,000 in 1820. A truly horrific fact. What makes things even more terrible is that the first English settlers depended on the Native Americans for survival, and they often traded goods and skills with the Europeans. But as time went on, English settlers saw the Native Americans as savages and became increasingly brutal in their treatment of them. Throughout the travels and explorations in America, the English also settled in the Caribbean. In fact, the islands off of the north coast of America would become the most profitable in the entire empire, for that time, of course. The first of which was the Isle of Barbados in 1627, when Charles I granted a royal charter to colonize the island. By 1643, the English plantation owners introduced the South Asian sugarcane plant to Barbados. Sugarcane thrived in the climate, and the entire plant was used. The leftovers after refining the sugar became molasses and then rum. Therefore, the crop was known as white gold, making the plantation owners some of the wealthiest people in England, which meant that England quickly added to the colonies in that area because it was so fertile. In the 1660s, the string of islands, including Antigua, Nevis, and Jamaica, which England had seized from Spain in 1655 in the Anglo-Spanish War, meaning that their colonies expanded ever more. By 1775, Britain's sugar trade was worth 5 times more than that of the tobacco trade. Farming sugarcane, however, was very labor-intensive. British criminals were sent to the Caribbean islands to work the fields as their punishment, but they were unable to stand the Caribbean climate and heat and often died from diseases like yellow fever and malaria. The solution of this shortage of labor became brutal and horribly simple: African slaves. We will talk about the slave trade in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope that you did actually enjoy that. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're feeling generous, please find the link down below to donate to a charity. The more you know.